I don't know if you'd have heard the anagram that should, must, ought to and got to spells smog.
Smog? I've not come across that one. I like that. Yeah. I have, just psychotherapists say we should avoid masturbation and hardening of the uterus. I've not heard that one. Reminds me of fine, which a lot of psychotherapists, well, there's different versions of that, isn't there? Fucked up, insecure, neurotic and emotional is one of them. I'm fine, yeah. Yeah. And again, I mean, well, just to pick on neuroticism, there are other things as well, but neuroticism, neurotic beliefs, neurotic feelings and thoughts and so on, I mean, quite obviously they belong very much to this story of time. The past is not just real but very important, and the future is not just, it will be real and very important. And so a lot of neurotic feelings aggregate around that, accrete around that. Guilt has to be about the past. Anxiety has to be about the future. About the story of the character that lives in time, yeah. It's one of the reasons, sorry, I'll just add this, it's one of the reasons why some of the things that the character might consider to be quite negative, like powerful, uncomfortable feelings, can get stronger when this is seen, not disappear or get weaker. So for example, oh yes, I mean, there's this wonderful thing called enlightenment in which knowing anger will arise. Well, fuck that. Anger is a kind of natural response to certain things that may apparently happen. And for the person, anger is often kind of, I want to say, dumbed down. It's kind of attenuated, it's weakened by the neurotic self. So anger becomes irritation. Irritation's a neurotic feeling, anger isn't a neurotic feeling, anger is just a feeling, it's a natural feeling. When this is seen, it's not just likely that anger will continue to arise, it's quite likely that it may arise more and more strongly if the character before that was neurotic and only allowed itself to experience irritation. And the difference, one of the many differences between neurotic feelings and what are sometimes called natural feelings is that neurotic feelings can drone on and on and on for hours, days, weeks, months, and in some cases years, whereas natural feelings just tend to arise spontaneously and then they're gone. So each of us in this room may know somebody who has been irritable, not just for 5 minutes, but for 5 years. Each of us in this room may know someone whose irritability is actually a way of life. But it's unlikely that we'll know somebody who's been angry for such long periods of time, because apart from anything else, it's just too bloody exhausting. Anger comes up and it doesn't in itself cause problems. So when this is described as a kind of more natural way of being, if you like, that doesn't necessarily mean a more peaceful and loving way of being in the way that peaceful and loving are usually construed by the mind. This might be very bad news for psychotherapists, actually, because it might put some of them out of business. Because in a flash, all that work I might have been doing with my psychotherapist, over 5 years, in a flash, that might be over. I'm not saying it necessarily will be over, but it might be.
Well, why wouldn't it be over?
Because there may be reasons still to want to explore.
Entertainment, you mean?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. It's all entertainment. Cosmic entertainment, yeah. Yeah. Specific life circumstances might arise where that kind of support is felt to be helpful. Who knows, yeah. Yeah.
Is there a difference between this seeing, to use that word that we don't like, and, let's say, a Buddhist conception of enlightenment?
Yeah, this isn't a concept. Yeah. Yeah, that's the difference. I mean, this can be turned into a concept in a way, you know, it has to be because we're talking about it, but that's kind of meaningless.
Well,
I think also maybe something about the sense of importance. I mean, I'm kind of quite keen on Buddhism in many ways, actually, but in terms, that's another difference in terms of like the sense of importance. There's a sense of importance that anything that becomes kind of a, you know, a path, let's say, a spiritual path, whatever it might be, it tends to be a sense of importance attached to it. You know, and you know, where if I'm kind of looking for connections with this, I don't tend to see those connections in any spiritual path. The connections seem to be much more in what mystics have said, which is quite different to spiritual paths.
Well, the importance comes from the experience of suffering. I mean,
Yeah.
that is a possibly universal human experience,
Mm-hmm.
and we seem to be very orientated around finding an answer to that problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of inevitable, really. Yeah, but it's not, yeah, not for each individual member, maybe for each individual, but it's kind of inevitable that will go on. Yeah, it's natural. We'll look for ways of decreasing suffering. And when we think we've found something, we'll follow it until it fails us. Maybe we'll follow something else. Yeah. And this isn't really about that.
But you're not proposing a way of answering the problem of suffering?
No, absolutely not. I'm not proposing anything.
Okay.
I'm certainly not proposing a way. No. No.
So that's the difference, isn't it?
I'd say it's a profound difference. Yeah, absolutely. This is and noticing, if you like, the possibility of noticing that although suffering arises, there's no one who suffers. Yeah. I've quoted this many a time. I was at a meeting with Tony Parsons once, and somebody asked him whether there's less suffering when this is seen, and he just said, no, more. And in a way, you think, well, you know, is that just a kind of, you know, if you know Tony, you know what he's like, is that in some ways, is that just a provocative remark, an attempt to deconstruct people's assumptions and so forth, which he's very good at doing? Well, in a way it might be, but it's not just that. I mean, the fact is that the neurotic self is very good at dumbing down suffering. So what the neurotic self does is it doesn't experience suffering so intensely, and the price of that is that instead of that, it experiences it for a much longer period of illusory time. So anger's over quickly, irritation can last a very long time. You see, so what happens when, let's say, the natural state is re-entered? I'm not quite sure I'm happy with that phrase, but I'll let it stand for now. What happens when the natural state of being is re-entered, you know, is that suffering might become more intense in terms of the intensity of feelings of sorrow, pain, anger, whatever. But it's unlikely they'll go on for very long. Yeah.
You mentioned the difference between what you hear mystics say versus a spiritual path.
Yeah.
Can you expand?
Can I expand? Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, mystics, I think, generally speaking, make no attempt whatsoever to do the impossible, which is to suggest that there is a way in which I can help you to attain something called whatever it might be, you know, whatever it might be, spiritual awareness or whatever. Whereas, you know, the phrase is, that the clue is in the phrase that I'm inevitably going to use, the spiritual, what's the next word that automatically comes almost paths, the spiritual paths. So the difference is that You know, another word that comes to me is teaching. You know, I mean, the phrase mystical teaching just seems really weird and odd, but spiritual teaching, oh yes, I'm interested in that. Yes, please give me some spiritual teaching. So the idea is that all the mystic can do is go kind of, wow, fuck me, wow. You know, there's nothing useful that can be got from the mystic, whereas the spiritual, and again I have to say teacher, it just trips off the tongue so naturally. The spiritual teacher suggests there is some place that I have got to, up the mountain, maybe the top of the mountain, maybe not, but higher up the mountain than you're on, and come with me, give me your money, learn these matters, whatever it might be, you know, and I will teach you how you too can ascend the spiritual path. Again, that's a phrase that trips off the tongue, the spiritual path. Is the mystical path? No, there's no mystical path. So it's a sort of profound difference, really. And I'll quote my favourite mystic. I know very few mystics to quote because there aren't many. But even the ones that are, I don't actually know many quotes of them, but I'll give you a quote from my favourite mystic. I can tell you nothing of this except it is a lie. Boom! Yeah, it's great. You know, how futile is this? We cannot say a word about this except it is a lie. How futile it is, and yet somehow its beauty seems to me, and you may radically disagree with this, its futility, you know, its beauty seems to me to lie in its futility. You know, if we were here to achieve something, if I was here suggesting that this afternoon might help us achieve something, it just seems to me, oh God, another bloody task to be accomplished. And oh yeah, the beauty of this is its futility, a bit like art. You know, the beauty of art is in its futility. It's not utilitarian. Spiritual paths are utilitarian. They may be utilitarian, we hope, on a spiritual level, but they're utilitarian. The Buddha's Eightfold Noble Path. I quite like Buddhism, I've probably already said that, but nevertheless, you know, there's a lot to do. Bloody hell, there's a lot to do. Get on with it. What are you doing sitting here on your lazy arse listening to a talk about non-duality? Get on with it. Come on, get serious if you want. If you want to be a stream entrant, or if you're already a stream entrant, you want to get your future lifetimes cut down from 9 to 8 in this one, then get on with it. Stop wasting your time. This is beautifully futile. I want to say this is about wasting time, except there isn't any time to waste, so I can't say that. There's no time to waste. There's no one to waste it. This is it. Will I become a stream entrant into the Buddha Dharma? I am already a stream entrant. How many lifetimes about stories? This is it. And in this, any story may arise, and that's as good as any other story. Some of us find these stories fascinating. I do, you know. It's a lively mind, buzzes around up here, but it's an entertainment. And one of my favourite all-time quotes comes from a Buddhist. A relaxation is the key to Buddhahood, here and now. It's not my way of putting it, but I love it. Relaxation is the key to Buddhahood, here and now. That's the last line of a great, big, thick, incredibly serious book about Tibetan Buddhism. It's actually the last line of the introduction. It's wonderful. And then we have this medieval mystic who was executed by the Catholic Church. There is nothing I can tell you of this except it is a lie. I mean, it's harsh, that. could have put it a bit more kindly, kind of understand maybe why the church decided to execute her, but it's bang on the button. And in a sense, neither any of that nor anything else that we say and talk about here has any importance whatsoever, because actually what happens is what happens. What happens is what happens. So if there's a magnetic pull towards the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, or there's a magnetic pull to becoming a Catholic priest, sorry, you two can't do that, but that's tough. Or a magnetic pull to go horse racing, or a magnetic pull to become to do an indigenous people's shamanic. Well, that's what might happen. It won't definitely happen, but it's what might happen. And it's all equally, beautifully, gloriously meaningless.
How do you know all that?
I don't know this at all. I don't know anything. It's just something seen which is completely impersonal. Something seen which is completely impersonal. And then
So you observe it?
And then this goes yakety, 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 or it doesn't. No, I don't observe it. Nobody observes it. It's not an observation, and it's not something that happens to a you. It's something that's seen when you aren't there. So what's there when you aren't there seeing this oneness? The difference, in a way, you could say, between seeing this and not seeing this is when there's not a seeing this, there is the illusion that there's a you there getting in the way. I'm not going to say it's only an illusion, because only diminishes it. It's an illusion, which is very kind of profound. And it's in the way, and when that illusion isn't there, then there's just seeing that, if you like, there is experience, but there's no experiencer. There's speaking, but there's no speaker. There's listening, but there's no one who listens. There's seeing, but there's no one who sees. And then after that, well, you could say sometimes this language is used to try to clarify something. After that, there's a kind, well, unless there's physical death, there's a character. You could say before that there's a person, and after that there's a character. And some of those characters somehow find it entertaining to talk about this, but others of them don't, so they don't do that. You could say that the simplest things become profound, and the most profound things become meaningless. I mean, the most profound things for a person usually revolve around their belief systems in some way. Their belief systems are just exploding in this, that seem to be just stories. So the most profound thing may become meaningless, and the most meaningless apparent thing, like a squirrel on a tree trunk looking at you, may become absolutely profound. We're in a hopeless case. The obvious thing to say is because there's nothing we can do about our predicament. Actually, of course, it's not that. It's that there is no one who is in the predicament. There's a saying in Zen Buddhism which I love: "I'd love to help you," says the monk to the student. "I'd love to help you, but I'm afraid in Zen we don't have anything." So you might as well look at the squirrel on the tree trunk.
What does hopelessness mean to Richard?
Say again?
What does hopelessness mean to Richard?
Oh, nothing profound or tricky, just the collapse of hope. So I claim to have come up with what I call the great mantra. It was at a meeting long ago by another non-dual speaker, Nathan Gill. And I might have been moved by the presence of God because it came into my mind and I had to shout it out to the assembly because it was, I don't know, a moment of Tourette's maybe. The great mantra, hopeless, helpless, meaningless. Hopeless, helpless, meaningless. This is the practice. There is no other practice but to repeat this mantra. We are helpless. It is hopeless. Everything is meaningless. I don't know, I just blurted it out one day at a meeting, and a friend of mine was there, who you may remember, Giovanni. Do you remember Giovanni? Vaguely. And he came up to me in the tea break and he put his hand on my shoulder and he looked me deeply in the eyes. He said, "Richard," he said, "that was the most depressing thing I've ever heard anybody say." But then he also said, "But it was wonderful."
It's not what you would call an affirmation, is it really?
It's not exactly an affirmation, though. I don't know if there could be any such thing as a non-dual affirmation. I don't know. But it does kind of sum something important up about us, it seems. You know, it is hopeless. You know, we think we can do something about this. We think we can get somewhere. We can't because we don't exist. We can't because we don't exist. You know. Therefore, a feeling of helplessness may arise. And out of that, a feeling of hopelessness may arise. And that may sound terrible. I mean, in a kind of, you know, Judeo-Christian Protestant work ethic, puritanical kind of culture, that may sound absolutely awful. Oh my God, keep that away from me. That is the stuff of Satan. Hopeless, helpless, meaningless. But actually, hopelessness, oh no, it mustn't fall into the worst thing. Actually, hopelessness can be kind of relaxing. It can lead to despair. Well, that's the worst thing of all, despair. It's probably one of the deadly sins in at least some of the sort of Christian paths or whatever. Hopeless, helplessness,
In experience
despair.
here, like, despair is just another function of hope. Like,
Oh right, okay.
yeah,
Except I suggest there may be a difference. There may be, right? But as long as there's hope, I mean, I say hope is a very hard taskmaster because as long as there's hope, there's always something you can be doing. Come on, get off your lazy arse and do it. With despair, if it's genuine despair, I'm not just talking about a kind of mental thing. I mean a really solid kind of, you know, enveloping despair. The one thing about genuine despair is that, you know, there is nothing you can do, and so in a strange way it brings about, or it may bring about, in some cases, it brings about a kind of relaxation. And relaxation, as I've already said, quoting somebody else, is the key to Buddhahood.
I think
I'm
that's
not saying it's pleasant, of course it's not pleasant, and yet, I mean, I talk to a lot of people about this, you know, and quite often despair can be experienced as a kind of relief. You know, there it really is nothing to be done, nothing that I, in inverted commas, can do. And quite often, it's, and I have to say seems to, because we're talking about a story that unfolds in time that doesn't really exist. But quite often, despair seems to precede awakening. That's not a recipe. That's not an instruction.
no.
It's not a path. I'm not saying go away and, you know, do everything you can to experience despair. It's not that. But I just notice that in a lot of cases, people I talk to, and here as well, despair precedes awakening. The dark night of the soul, as they call it in the Christian tradition.
Yeah, it tends to be when there's a loss of something, and you know a person can still have some kind of attachment to that thing, like there can be that despair or grief.
Yeah.
And I think that in that point, like where they still feel that grief, there's still that attachment, and there's that despair, there's still that hope that, you know, wish it was a different kind of way, and there's sort of that, you know, feeling of loss.
Yeah.
But when there's true, well, when there's, I'm not going to say hopeless, but I'm going to say when there's a lack, when hope is no longer a thing, then, you know, neither is despair, neither is grief. It's just, you know, those aren't the words for it anymore.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe aloneness, maybe somewhere closer to the ground, you could say.
I think also, I don't know if there's a difference in what we're describing, because I'm not talking about a sort of loss of hope or a sense of despair about anything in particular. I'm looking for you to despair about a particular circumstance in our life. I'm talking about a kind of a generalised, like, you know, it's hopeless, a giving up, and somehow in that, you know, in that despair, somehow a relaxation can take place.
Yeah. It's just that the words are a little bit charged to the general public, that, you know...
Oh, of course.
Yeah, that,
oh my God, the general public.
yeah,
Oh, God, yes.
yeah.
Every word that's said in here is an abomination to the general public. That goes without saying.
Or when there's a word that has some attached value or meaning to it in
Yeah.
general use, then it can lead people in believing that there's a path to go on.
Yeah, oh well, yeah, the mind will always do that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you did say sign the waiver. Did we not get you to sign the waiver when you came in here, that, you know, the management bear no responsibility for the misconstruing of any word that is said about non-duality? Yeah, of course, the mind is constantly interpreting and reinterpreting this all the time to try to turn it into something which the mind can control. I mean, that's the mind's, it's one of the mind's chief interests, you know. The mind that doesn't exist, the ego in that sense that doesn't exist. I'm in control here. I'm managing this. I'm the one that's going to decide when you're going to give up mating, whether you're going to keep saying your mantra, mating, you know. I'm the one. Of course, that's kind of always a given. You know, the ego's going to be working away like that, until it isn't. And the mind's always going to be saying, I can get you there. Come on, don't listen to this garbage. Non-duality, radical, no, what's that? Come on, don't listen to that. I can get you there. Come on, there's this retreat. There's this retreat in Scotland, right? And you have to meditate for 10 hours a day, sitting cross-legged on the floor. You know how much you hate that. So that's going to be really good for you. They've got no heating. They're surrounded by farmland with sheep grazing, and they make you eat nut rissoles because they're vegans. Come on. There's going to be so much suffering involved, Richard. It's bound to get you a few inches further up the mountain. Come on. Oh, and by the way, the abbot who was going to take the retreat, you know, won't be able to be there because he's in court, you know, being tried for. I'm not even going to finish that sentence. I'm not even going to complete that sentence.
You want to throw people into despair.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. Yeah. And in another sense, and in spite of that cartoonish and appalling caricature which I just drew, for which I should be horsewhipped, I mean, you know, doing such things may be, you know, wonderful. You know, you go down to Sharpham House in Devon and you do a Buddhist retreat in sunshine. By the way, somewhere on the estate they also happen to make organic wine. Well, there's a surprise. It could be lovely. also. Neither having anything to do or not to do with what we're saying. In other words, self-mortification, you know, or getting slightly pissed on organic wine at Charlton House, neither of those have any bearing on what we're saying here. They're both absolutely fine. This doesn't make any judgment. The character sits here and makes judgments. If you haven't noticed yet, this is a profoundly judgmental character sitting here. But this doesn't make any judgment. Unconditional love. It's the word unconditional which is the killer in there, not the word love. My contention is that pretty much everybody has some handle on what the word love is. If you have no handle whatsoever on what the word love is, it means you're a psychopath. And if you're a psychopath, you're very unlikely to be in this meeting. So I'm going to assume there are no psychopaths here. You know, love is not a difficult word. Unconditional. Unconditional love, that is really, really difficult to get hold of, because unfortunately unconditional means what it says. It means accepting of everything. You think about that. Think about all the things the mind hates, and unconditional love embraces all of that. So again, my contention is, not even the character can, unconditional love, you must be joking. But when the solidity of the person drops, that can just be seen. If there was a sound that went with the seeing of this, the first seeing of this, I would say that sound would have to be some variant of wow. And part of that wow, a good part of that wow, is the recognition that this is unconditional love. Why is that such a shock? Well, it's obvious, because it doesn't look like that, does it? Well, some of it doesn't look like that. Definitely some of it doesn't look like it.
What else can be in the oneness but unconditional love?
Yeah, I agree. Nothing. I mean, I kind of mean that word nothing in both ways. As in, well, no, nothing else, but also this is nothing. This is nothing appearing as everything, and the nature of that is unconditional love.
So are you suggesting that unconditional love is real?
What does real mean?
Well,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, more real than anything else you've been talking about.
Yeah, I suppose I am in a way. Yeah, I'd say, this is an appearance. Everything that has activity, everything that arises has activity, whatever that is, motion, sound, feeling, sensation, or whatever. And all of that is a kind of illusion, as I've already said, not meaning it doesn't exist, but meaning it's not what it appears to be. And these are dangerous words, but nevertheless, I mean, they're dangerous in the sense that they're a little bit misleading, aren't they? But nevertheless, we could say that underlying that, or you could say, if you like, all apparent phenomena arise out of emptiness and fullness. And the nature of that fullness, what is the nature of that fullness? What's it full of? Unconditional love. And so the suggestion here is not just that can be directly seen, but it's the direct seeing of that brings an end to seeking. Yes, absolutely, that's what's been said, yeah. Yeah. And you could say that sometimes, not always, when this is seen, there are two shocks. And one shock is to see that this as a solid person doesn't exist. And the other shock is to see that everything consists of emptiness and fullness, and the nature of the fullness is unconditional love. That's a real shock. And also, it's part of that shock that silence and sound are the same thing, and emptiness and fullness are the same thing. And in that sense, everything is equal. So, I've used this many times before, we may be standing in Piccadilly Circus on the busiest afternoon of a hot summer's day, with traffic rushing past, buses rushing past, people all around us, noise all around us, and that is as silent as the most sacred Zen monastery, and it's as still as the most sacred Zen monastery. And that's not poetry. There's no image in there. I'm not trying to paint some metaphysical picture with words. That is an attempt to describe something literally. It's a failed attempt because it has to be a failed attempt, but it's an attempt to describe something literally. There's nothing poetic about that description. It's as prosaic in a way as saying, if you want to make an omelette, first crack 3 eggs into a bowl. There's no more poetic than that.
Once you say that unconditional love is important, or in some sense real, aren't you on a road to moralism and morality and moral realism?
I hope not.
Shouldn't
Oh my
it?
God, I
Shouldn't
hope
it?
not.
No?
I don't think I said it was important. I just said it's the underlying reality. I probably didn't even say that, but I would say it's the underlying reality. I hope I didn't say it was important. Nothing's any more or less important than
It's
anything
only
else.
on this side of the divide where we're not in unconditional love, that was the mind is generating, I like this and I don't like that.
Yes.
That gives rise to tension, contention,
Yeah.
anger, all the stuff
Yeah.
that isn't relaxed.
Attraction
the
towards,
non-peace.
repulsion from. Yes. Yeah. No, I didn't say it's important. I just said that's the underlying reality.
And you talked about the problem of suffering, in this space was half an hour ago. And I've been holding the question, surely suffering it becomes the problem of the mind to cope with an experience, or not cope with an experience. Not cope with a feeling or a sensation or something that feels unpleasant, or that is judged by the mind to be unpleasant, because another person of the same phenomenon might in the phenomenal world feel quite differently. But minds are tricky buggers.
Mind is a tricky bugger. That is a good. If you ever write a book about non-duality, that's your title there, I reckon. The mind is a tricky bugger. Definitely. Absolutely. Even though it doesn't exist. I love this talk, and it's wonderful, the kind of, I don't know, are we personifying the mind or anthropomorphizing? Well, basically, we're pretending that something exists when it doesn't actually exist. But
it exists within the dream.
Yeah, within the dream it exists, although even within the dream you could say it consists simply of a kind of, this constant flow of thoughts and other perceptions. There's no actual thing behind it. We're sort of reifying that constant flow of impressions and saying, well, there's something behind it, giving rise to it called the mind. Yeah, in which case, absolutely, it's a tricky bugger. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And some of what is said here is definitely, and in other places, not just here, and it is definitely an abomination to the mind. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know anything about artificial intelligence really, but I'm raising this topic because there might be somebody in the room who does. But I'm wondering if the science and the study of artificial minds would give a different perspective or lend support to or not to what you're saying. I'll just raise that as in case anybody has any knowledge on that topic.
Well, my guess from a position of almost complete blissful ignorance is no. AI is just clever computing, and
Well, that's
I
my
have
thing.
no time for the idea that somehow AI AI constructions will somehow become sentient, but maybe somebody else in the room. I'm just going to point out that it's 20 seconds to tea break, so maybe somebody else in the room would like to chance their arm to be enraging all the rest of us by taking our tea break away from us to talk about it. No. Does anybody have anything to contribute to that? You know?
Maybe during tea.
Say again?
Maybe during tea.
Yeah, maybe during tea break or after tea, yeah, but I do think there is something about sentience which, you know, the enthusiasts of AI have not actually quite noticed, you know, a bit like tech billionaires who hope to download their beings somehow onto a complex CD and go on existing forever in the ethosphere or whatever. I'm not going any more into that territory. I know when I'm beaten by a topic. It's tea break.